Hello everyone, and welcome to this brief overview of OMFIF's new journal from our Digital Monetary Institute, or DMI. In our first edition, we looked at retail CBDC, or cash to the man and woman in the street. And this time, in our second edition, we're looking at wholesale CBDC, which takes us into the plumbing of the financial system as a whole. I'm John Orchard, OMFIF's CEO, and joining me to talk about the highlights of this coverage are Bhavin Patel, DMI's editor, and Phil Middleton, its chair. Thank you both for joining me. Phil, a couple of years ago, there was great excitement about the coming blockchain revolution in financial services, and then it all went a bit quiet. Why was that?
Well, you're right. Everybody and his grandmother 2 or 3 years ago was piling into blockchain projects. In the first instance, they found, after some experimentation, that blockchain didn't solve every financial problem that people wanted to solve. In particular, when a trusted central counterparty already existed, why on earth would you want to replace it? Secondly, the technology itself didn't prove terribly scalable from experimentation phase to mass usage. And thirdly, regulators were, let's say, distinctly unenthusiastic about the whole idea. So it did rather die down, but now we're seeing a resurgence for a different set of reasons.
Thank you. Bhavin, what's changed then?
So I don't think much has changed in terms of the issues. So the pain points in banking operations have not gone away. The issues we explored in our report in 2018 on wholesale CBDC are still relevant today. And this was also confirmed somewhat in our survey of major banks we did earlier this year about their plans to adopt blockchain in their operations. And it has been these types of institutions who have progressed in developing interbank payment systems, which are permission private systems, of course. So yes, a lot of the bad ideas have been driven out through experiments, and sandboxes have focused the use cases where some have even come to market. So there is genuine use cases which have persisted. So motivations which these are trying to solve have been in inefficiency, lack of real-time payments, risks and high payment and settlement costs. So these are the major issues that banks have been focusing on. Some of these are JPM Quorum, for example, the Finality Group, and their developments with USC Coin, HSBC FX Everywhere, Union Bank in the Philippines, are just examples of some real use cases where blockchain-based payment and settlement systems have added real value to banking operations. And a lot of focus has been on cross-border inefficiencies. So all in all, the private sector has driven development so far when it comes to digital payments for interbank operations, but central banks are still aware that the issues still remain within their traditional systems that they run.
You mentioned a few use cases just now. Which are the ones that you think are most interesting, and tell us why?
I know we are looking at central bank initiatives, but we must remember that upgrading wholesale payments infrastructure is much more than just introducing a wholesale central bank digital currency. So it may seem that central banks have slowed down in this area, but a lot has been happening. So for one, faster payment systems are being increasingly introduced, and the Central Bank of Hungary puts forward their case in this edition's magazine, and explains the benefits of how such a system will afford them with faster payments with minimal issues for liquidity strains for payment service providers. This is an issue that has been somewhat cropped up for real-time payments. So the US, of course, is planning to implement similarly FedNow systems in the next few years. And the UK, for example, is constantly upgrading its RTGS system. Something that they title as the RTGS Renewal Program. The Bank of England aims to develop an RTGS service which is fit for the future, increasing the resilience and access and offering wide interoperability and functionality. So additionally, they will look at how the RTGS might interoperate with DLT when a payments solution comes to market, which is DLT based. So it is more than just CBDCs that is happening in this space, but with central bank digital currency initiatives, the Banque de France journal contribution is just the latest of some of the wholesale CBDC developments, and they find an economic benefit to their plans. So they state that the issuance of a wholesale CBDC would boost the financial sector's productivity and promote innovation. This would contribute to higher economic growth in the long run. Similarly, I had a good conversation with Saray Shea. An extract of this transcript and conversation, which is featured in the journal, highlights that there is a chance of developing a backbone infrastructure in the Cambodian payments industry. So the country itself doesn't have an RTGS system, but there is potential to leapfrog traditional methods of doing things. So I think we will see a lot more than just private sector consortia developments in the future. The central banks are making slow but significant progress.
Thank you, Bevin. Phil, Bevin just referred to the economic benefits that some people see in introducing CBDC. Where do you see the big opportunities, and also what are the remaining issues in their way?
There are multiple remaining issues, John, and I think it's going to be some time before we see full-scale, if you like, industrial capability around CBDC. So that there are the technological issues I referred to. There are considerable legal issues. There are massive issues about anonymity and privacy, transparency. There are issues around potential for money laundering and financial crime. There are major issues around cybersecurity. So regulatory authorities, whilst they can see that in theory, having a functioning stable coin based or tokenized wholesale exchange operating in certain asset categories could liberate a lot of innovation, could make transactions an awful lot more efficient, they see considerable risks. And therefore, I would say in most parts of the world, particularly in Europe and North America, the authorities are wanting to go very slowly and very carefully, hand in hand with the private sector, yes, but being very clear that it is they, the public authorities, who hold the keys to this.
Bavin, Phil touched on technical issues alongside all of the policy ones that still need to be resolved, which are pretty fundamental. Where do you see the biggest technology problems still ahead?
I mean, yes, there are still issues with the technology, and therefore a range of options are being considered by central banks from the traditional infrastructure. So these are DLT hybrid models which work with standard network infrastructures, somewhat have been adopted by the Cambodians and the Chinese projects, for example. So OMFIF has always approached our research with an agnostic view in mind when it comes to the technology. But the reason why DLT has been pointed to so many times is purely on the benefits of what blockchain could offer. So the resiliency and increased functionality are probably the key features which are most appealing from the traditional setup. Another interesting point made by the Banque de France is the prerequisites needed before wholesale CBDC implementation. So these are from an operational point of view. Firstly, the technology employed should ensure scalability. Second, it should preserve confidentiality. And third, it should allow for interoperability, while also preventing the uncontrolled dissemination of the CBDC. So in particular, central banks must prevent their wholesale digital currencies from being used in illicit transactions. So this links back to Phil's point made about KYC and AML. We will also see these issues being increasingly solved through each iteration of experiments, and hopefully we'll likely see some wholesale system which meets central bank objectives come to market soon.
Like there are quite a few twists and turns still to come in this story, both among private sector suppliers and their technical solutions, and among the official sector, which still has some very fundamental issues to take views on. We look forward to following all that closely. Do please join us at omfif.org to read the journal, find out about becoming a DMI member, and join some of these conversations in real time. Thank you very much.